Hi everybody, my name is Millie and welcome to my channel. I post some random stuff on my channel before, but I thought I would actually start to do something that was a bit of a series. So I thought I would start a YouTube channel where I would start talking about folklore around the British Isles and beyond, in case anybody like me wants to learn about it all in one place. So I decided to start this series that you're currently watching called Folklore Fridays. Obviously the British Isles and the United Kingdom and Great Britain, or whatever you want to call it, have a lot of folklore stories. But I thought for this first episode I would focus on one that I know quite a bit about, and that would be because I grew up in the city where this specific folklore is based. In order to understand the fable, however, we should probably understand the history of the land that it comes from. All folklore comes from somewhere, and that is what I'm most interested in learning, why or when these things came into existence. So our first folklore story today comes from Lincolnshire in the middle of England. It's currently where I am right now. Many people know Lincolnshire for Lincolnshire sausages, our connection to the United States of America and the many, many places called Lincoln over there, and our very famous and very steep hill. Most people more recently know Lincoln for the University of Lincoln and that one episode of The In-Betweeners where it was mentioned. I'm actually a student at the University of Lincoln studying film, but my interests really lie in the supernatural and the folklore and why we believe the things we do. Lincoln is a city with a really vibrant culture and history that stretches back thousands and thousands of years, and not a lot of people pay that much mind to the history of Lincolnshire. A lot of people don't even know where it is. So for this first bit I'm going to give you a bit of a history lesson, and I'm sorry if it's a little bit boring, but it's important to know before we get to the folklore of this fable. The history of Lincolnshire stretches back at least as far as the Stone Age due to the axes that have been found in the village of Welton in the Wolds, made of flint from the hills. It's a well-known fact to those who maybe grew up in Lincolnshire or have lived here for a while that Lincolnshire folk are hardy folk. We have a history of being farmers, builders, inventors and explorers, so we know how to get things done, as is actually demonstrated in my surname, part of it anyway, being Hardy. That is a Lincolnshire surname. So the fact that we stretch back as far as the Stone Age does not surprise me in the slightest. We can cope with a lot and we build strong foundations, and that's one of the reasons why I'm proud to be a yellow belly. Lincoln really came to prominence in AD 43 when the Romans arrived in England and they colonised Lincolnshire, or at the time what was a whole bunch of fields, very quickly, dubbing it Lindum Colonia and making it one of the strongholds of the country. One of the first democratic governments was set up in Lincolnshire, or Lindum Colonia as it was known then, as well as the Romans building 15 forts and 3 main roads, and everybody who knows Roman roads are very straight and has ever driven the A15 will know why that is still a thing today. It's a very long and very boring road that is very straight and very boring. The Romans were in Lindum Colonia for a very long time, and there is still a lot of evidence of them being here around the city, including the Roman baths very close to where I live, some place names and some dig sites that have recovered a lot of Roman finds. After the Romans they left Lindum Colonia to the Saxons utilised the strongholds that the Romans had built to their own advantage to keep away the Celts or the others who may want to attack the city. The Saxons established a lot of farms and a lot of farming land within Lindum Colonia, and it grew and grew to be one of the biggest counties in the UK. Although at the time it was part of what was known as Mercia or East Anglia, which were 2 neighbouring counties and would later be combined to be Lincolnshire. Fans of history's Vikings show will be very familiar with the character of Ivar the Boneless. And Ivar the Boneless was a real Viking who came to the UK, or England as it was at the time, to attack the Saxons that were established and to avenge the death of his father Ragnar Lothbrok. He arrived in Lincolnshire, or what was then East Anglia, and he utilised the River Humber that still exists today to get his boats into Mercia so he could then attack Wessex. This didn't really go to plan, and according to history, Alfred, who was king at the time, and Ivar sat down and decided to split up the UK so that the Vikings had some farming land and so they would stop attacking. This is why Alfred is actually known as Alfred the Great, because he, rather than fighting the Vikings, he decided to make friends with them. And so Mercia and East Anglia at the time became what was known as Danelaw, and the Vikings were given this rich farming land to their own advantage to make their farms and to build civilization within Danelaw. The Viking legacy is perhaps one of the ones that lasted the longest in Lincolnshire, and a lot of our place names still are Viking root. Places like Saxelby, Skellingthorpe, Skegness, Grimsby, Caneby, Spittlegate, and many others that end in suffixes that the Vikings brought to this country. And a lot of those that I've just mentioned are either farming towns or coastal towns, which makes a lot of sense for the Viking people. It was the Vikings that decided that Lindum Colonia was too long of a name and needed to be shortened to Lincoln, which comes from the Lyn in Lindum and the Cologne in Colonia, and got shortened to Lincoln, and that was what it was known as for a little while until the Normans came and added shire on the end. When the Normans arrived in 1066 and William I became King of England, he decided to do what everyone had done so far and utilise Lincoln as one of his strongholds within the country. It was on the east coast and so easy to get from France to England, but that also meant that it was easy for threats to come from France. So in 1068, after being king for a very short time, William I commissioned one of the most famous landmarks of the city that still stands to this day, Lincoln Castle. Lincoln Castle was built on the foundations of what was once a Roman fort, expanded and given William I's very specific way of building castles, which we know to this day. Lincoln Castle remains to this day one of the biggest tourist attractions. It is also one of the only Victorian jails that exists and has been preserved as a museum, meaning that many places use it to film, such as Downton Abbey. As well as Lincoln Castle, William I brought the other and perhaps more noticeable landmark of Lincolnshire. The decision to build such a landmark brought Lincoln to prominence within not just England but the rest of Europe and perhaps even the world at the time. In 1072, William commissioned the first Roman Catholic Bishop of Lincoln, Remigius de Rechon, to build what would become the most famous landmark in all of Lincolnshire, and William's biggest achievement since his conquest, Lincolnshire Cathedral. And it is Lincoln Cathedral that is the base of our folklore story for today. At the time of construction, it stood 83 metres, which doesn't sound like that much until you're standing right next to it, and then it is very, very tall. But that wasn't all they were going to do. In the 14th century, they added another 200 metres by building the central spire, which had been damaged previously by fire and earthquakes. The central spire made Lincoln Cathedral taller than the Pyramid of Giza, and therefore the tallest building in the world at that point of the 14th century. In the Norman period, construction took just under 20 years to build the cathedral as it was known then. It's been added to since, and was eventually set to be consecrated and therefore completed as a holy building in 1092. Our old friend Remigius unfortunately died 2 days before the consecration of the ground, so he never got to see his work completed. He was, however, buried beneath the cement floor of the cathedral, and his grave can still be seen to this day. As well as being one of the tallest buildings at the time, it was the tallest cathedral and predated Notre Dame in Paris by 71 years. In 1215, the Magna Carta, which was the charter drawn up by King John, was signed by Hugh within the cathedral. For a long time, the cathedral housed the original Magna Carta documents, which are now kept protected in Lincoln Castle. The Magna Carta was an important document that meant the king had more power over his lords, because for a while it was sort of a council situation and he had to agree to what his lords told him. Lincoln Cathedral's Dean window and Bishop's Eye rose window predate the Notre Dame rose window by almost a century. I know I've been talking about the cathedral like some kind of architecture nerd, but it will come in handy shortly. In more modern history, Lincolnshire has been known a lot for its RAF advances and its inventions, but I will do a whole other video on the many, many ghost stories that exist in Lincolnshire to do with the RAF. And so That's the end of the history lesson, and I'm about to explain why I've been harping on about Lincoln Cathedral so much. It is relevant to today's Folklore Friday fable. As the story goes, in 1092, when they were preparing to consecrate the cathedral and finally make it a holy ground, the devil wanted to have one last stab at causing mischief within the cathedral before he was no longer allowed to set foot or send his minions. He released 3 young demons, or imps, to the cathedral and told them to wreak havoc. They did so, knocking over the dean, stealing his hat, ripping pages out of the Bibles and the books, hiding the candles and blowing them out, throwing stones, smashing windows, pulling up the slabs, and anything and everything that they could do to cause havoc before it became a consecrated building and they would no longer be allowed inside. The dean, who at that point was fed up with the imps causing mischief, he appealed to the angels and to God to help rid him of these pests. From the big Bible on the altar at the end wall, which can still be found there, not the original, but the Bible is always there, an angel rose from the pages, sent by God to rid the cathedral of these demons. The 3 imps decided they wouldn't go down without a fight, and one of them stood his ground and threw stones at this angel. The angel eventually grew bored of his mischief and turned the imp to stone. This imp can still be found at the top of the south wall pillar, and there is a spotlight, I believe, to help you find it. It's one of the greatest tourist attractions of the cathedral to this day. The other 2 imps fled through one of the windows that they had smashed. Deciding it was best to split up, they did so, and one of the imps climbed the side of the building. By this point, the angel had finished with the first imp and decided to pursue the second 2. He followed this imp up through the roof and the spires and eventually caught up with him above the south wall, above the south door, and turned him to stone too. He wasn't playing with this one, he just wanted them done. But the distraction that this imp had caused meant that the third managed to get away. The third imp escaped Lincoln City and decided to head north, and the angel took a few days to find him, eventually doing so in St. James Church in Grimsby. By this point, the angel was fed up with the imps and with the devil playing his tricks and decided to give the imp a thrashing. He did so and then turned him to stone, and to this day the St. James Church imp in Grimsby can still be found clutching his bare bottom after having his thrashing from the angel. After such a long history lesson, it feels like such a short story, but it is one of the most important folklore stories that exist in Lincolnshire. The imp is what people know the city for, and it's a very specific imagery that is aligned with Lincoln Cathedral. So if you didn't know the history, there you go, that's the story behind it. Some say that the devil released 5 imps, not 3, and that 2 of them managed to escape the angel almost altogether. The 4th made his way south all the way to Oxford and can be found at Oxford University in the wall, turned to stone, just like the angel did to the others. The 5th imp, however, was never caught by the angel, and it is said that on the night of a full moon you can hear the imp laughing at the angel around the spires of the cathedral, because the imp can no longer enter the cathedral after it was consecrated and made holy. The folklore of the Lincoln Imp is one that a lot of people have heard of, but they don't know the full story, and so I thought, as I came from Lincoln, it would be a great first episode of Folklore Fridays. It felt quite short, and I think that's because it's the first episode and I don't want to bore you all too much. And if you have enjoyed learning about the Lincoln Imp and listening to my folklore story, please leave me a comment down below and let me know. If you have folklore from where you are from in the UK or the British Isles, let me know and I'll do some research and maybe do a story time on that in the future. This is my first video, so please be kind and let me know where I can improve in the future or what I've done right this time. If you want to like and maybe subscribe on your way out, that would be great. And then you can come back next Friday for our next Folklore Friday. Thank you for joining me on my first Folklore Friday, and I hope to see you again